When I think back to that Thanksgiving, the memory still feels like a bruise that hasn't fully healed. The chill in the air that day wasn't just from the weather. There was something colder waiting inside the house where I grew up. I arrived with a warm smile, arms full of gifts, believing maybe this year things would be different. Maybe my parents would finally see me, not through the lens of their quiet resentment, not through the stereotypes they clung to when I was younger, but through the reality of who I'd become. I had spent years carving out a life on my own, away from the narrow expectations that once suffocated me, but I still hoped for their acceptance. I hoped for warmth. I hoped for family. Instead, the moment I stepped through the door, I felt every ounce of that hope crumble. The house smelled of roasted turkey and cinnamon, but the atmosphere was thick with tension. My parents looked at me like I was an uninvited stranger rather than the child they raised. They didn't know anything about the life I'd built, the empire I quietly created, or the $25 million sitting in my accounts. They only saw the old version of me, the version shaped by their prejudices and disappointments. Growing up, they believed that because of my mixed identity, the world would never allow me to be more than ordinary. They reminded me of it constantly. They positioned my skin tone as a disadvantage, insisting society would never be kind to someone like me. And even when I proved them wrong, their resentment only grew stronger, as though my success was an insult rather than a victory. Thanksgiving dinner was supposed to be peaceful, a simple attempt at reconnection, but the night spiraled faster than I could process. My parents made quiet comments, then louder ones. They criticized my choices, my independence, my lifestyle. They accused me of abandoning family traditions, as if those traditions weren't riddled with the kind of subtle racism that shaped my childhood. By the time dessert was served, they were no longer pretending to hide their bitterness. My mother looked directly at me and said I wasn't welcome unless I followed their ways. My father added, calmly, almost casually, that if I didn't like their rules, I could go live somewhere else. He pointed toward the front door, then toward the street. Go live in the streets. Just like that. As if I were disposable. As if I hadn't spent my entire life trying to earn even a fraction of their love. The words hit me harder than I expected. Not because I needed anything from them. I hadn't for years. But because it confirmed something painful. They didn't reject my choices. They rejected me. They rejected the part of me they could never understand. The part shaped by a grandmother they never acknowledged, a culture they pretended didn't exist, and a lineage they considered inconvenient. Their rejection wasn't new, but hearing it so blatantly, so coldly, so confidently, it shifted something inside me. I realized in that moment that coming back home was never about reconciliation. It was about testing whether they were capable of change. And they weren't. I walked out without arguing. I left behind the gifts I brought, the dessert I made, the peace offering I tried to extend. The night air felt harsh against my skin, but it was a reminder that freedom often comes disguised as loneliness. A few relatives stepped outside as I walked to my car, whispering that my parents were being too harsh, but none of them stepped in to help. Silence has always been the safest shelter for those who witness injustice, without wanting to disrupt their comfort. I had learned long ago that silence could hurt just as much as cruelty. 3 weeks passed after that night, and not one person from that house tried to reach out. Not even a message. But while they were busy pretending I didn't exist, the world I built continued to grow. The companies I founded, ones they once mocked, signed new contracts. The charitable foundation I created to support Black and minority youth received recognition in 3 major publications. And the new tech incubator I funded quietly opened its doors in a city they barely knew I lived in. Every achievement, every milestone, every donation was a silent reminder of how wrong my parents had been about me. They believed I would struggle. They expected me to fail. They thought my identity was a burden. But it became my strength. Life, however, has a way of circling back at unexpected moments. 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, I received a call from my cousin. He told me my parents' business was collapsing. Mismanagement, debt, and the financial storm they had ignored for years finally caught up to them. Their house, yes, the same house I was thrown out of, was at risk of foreclosure. They were desperate, scrambling for solutions, relying on hope rather than plans. My cousins said they regretted what happened on Thanksgiving. Not because they suddenly valued me, but because they needed help. They needed money. They needed the very child they dismissed, belittled, and pushed away. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I drove to the old neighborhood in silence, watching buildings grow smaller in the rearview mirror as memories resurfaced. When I arrived, I didn't knock on their door. I simply stood across the street, taking in the place that held so many painful lessons. I thought about the nights I cried in my room, feeling like an outsider in my own home. I thought about the times my parents insisted I would never succeed because people like me were never meant to reach high places. I thought about the ways they tried to make me hide who I was, to shrink myself into something more convenient for them. And I thought about that Thanksgiving night, the moment they told me to go live in the streets. I had the money to save them. $25 million isn't just wealth. It's leverage, opportunity, freedom. But it wasn't my responsibility to bail out people who never protected me. Still, I chose not to use my success as a weapon. I didn't show up to flaunt what I had. I didn't show up to rub salt in their wounds. Instead, I called the bank privately not to rescue them, but to make sure they received the resources and counseling they needed to avoid immediate homelessness. I helped from a distance, anonymously. Not because they deserved it, but because I refused to become the kind of person their hatred tried to shape me into. In the end, I didn't return to their home. I didn't seek their approval. I didn't offer reconciliation. Some stories don't end with forgiveness tied neatly in a bow. Some stories end with acceptance. Acceptance that family can hurt you in ways strangers never will. Acceptance that identity can become a wedge in households unwilling to grow. Acceptance that success doesn't erase old wounds, but gives you the power to choose how to heal them. And sometimes healing means walking away while still choosing kindness over revenge. Maybe one day they'll understand the weight of what they did. Maybe they won't. But I've learned that the greatest victory isn't proving people wrong. It's rising so high that their words no longer reach you. And if anyone watching this has ever been pushed aside because of who you are, or told that your identity is something to hide, then remember this. Your value is never determined by the people too blind to see it. The world is bigger than the rooms that fail to hold you. And sometimes, being pushed out is the very thing that leads you into your destiny.